My name is Emily Walker. I'm 42 years old, and just a few weeks ago, I was standing on the front porch of the house I grew up in, watching my breath form little clouds in the chilly autumn air. My key didn't work. The lock had been changed. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. I fumbled with it, trying it again and again, my fingers stiff from the cold. But nothing. The door wouldn't budge. I walked around to the back door. Same result. Then the side. Still locked out. My heart started pounding. I pulled out my phone, hands trembling, and texted my mother. "Are you home?" No response. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. Then I saw the message she had sent me hours earlier while I was at the local library applying for jobs. "You're not part of this family anymore. Don't come back." I stood there frozen, reading the words again and again. My mind struggled to make sense of it. Was this some kind of twisted joke? After moving back in only 6 months ago, after doing everything I could to help around the house, this is how it ends. My mother, Linda Walker, had always been strict, but I never thought she was cruel. She was 68, a retired school teacher with sharp eyes and even sharper opinions. Ever since I was a child, she had an idea of who I should be and never missed an opportunity to remind me of how I was falling short. I'd moved back into the house after my divorce. My life had unraveled quickly, my marriage ended, my freelance work dried up, and I found myself drowning in debt with nowhere to go. My father passed away years ago, and the only family I had left was her. I told myself it would just be temporary, a few months to get back on my feet, find a steady job, and move on. But as weeks turned into months, things got tense. She watched me like a hawk, constantly suggesting I get a real job, telling me I was wasting time with my writing. But still, I never imagined she'd do this. Lock me out. Shut me out. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold text and a house I could no longer enter. I walked back to my car, which I had parked down the street. I sat in the front seat with the engine off, the key still useless in my coat pocket. My whole body was shaking, not from the cold, but from disbelief. Where was I supposed to go? I had no money, no job, and no place to stay. I checked my bank account, barely enough for 2 nights at a cheap motel on the edge of town. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying her words in my head, wondering what I had done that was so unforgivable. Was it the fight we had last week about my writing? Or was it something deeper? Something she had never said out loud? 2 days later, I was sitting in the motel's tiny breakfast area, sipping bad coffee and checking job boards when I saw the email. The subject line read, "Urgent Walker Property. Please call immediately." The sender was a man named Carl Jennings. I had never heard of him. Under the subject, just one sentence stood out. "We have a problem. Please call as soon as possible." I stared at the email, reading it over and over again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less ominous. I had no idea who Carl Jennings was or what problem he was referring to. I just knew it had something to do with the house, the only thing I'd ever thought of as stable in my life. And now I was locked out of it. I waited until I'd gotten through 2 more cups of lukewarm motel coffee before I finally dialed the number listed in the email. My hands were still shaking when I pressed the call button. Carl Jennings speaking, came a calm, professional voice. Hi, this is Emily Walker. I got your email." There was a pause on the other end, then a shift in tone. "Ms. Walker, thank you for calling. I was hoping you'd reach out quickly. I'm the legal executor for the estate of Walter Walker, your father." That stopped me cold. "My father passed away nearly 9 years ago," I said. "Why would I be hearing from someone now?" "That's part of the reason I reached out," he said. "There are some legal matters related to the property in Woodbury that require your attention. I'd prefer to speak with you in person if you're available." I agreed, although I had no idea what I was walking into. The thought of my father made something ache in my chest. I missed him. Always had. He was the only one who ever made me feel like I was enough just as I was. Growing up, I was never the daughter my mother wanted. While other girls were joining cheer squads or volunteering for honor societies, I was holed up in my room reading classic novels and scribbling short stories in spiral notebooks. My dream was always to become a writer, a real one. But to my mother, Linda Walker writing was a fantasy, something for dreamers who didn't understand how the world worked. She had been a high school English teacher for over 30 years. She believed in outline structure and good grammar, but not in dreams. Definitely not mine. My father, on the other hand, quietly encouraged me. He gave me my first typewriter when I was 9. He'd leave small sticky notes on my desk with quotes from authors he thought I'd like. He wasn't loud or overly affectionate, but I knew he saw me, really saw me. When I told my parents I wanted to major in creative writing, my mother nearly had a meltdown at the dinner table. "You'll never make a living with that," she snapped. "Be practical, do something useful." I compromised, sort of. I double majored in English literature and communications. My father helped me pay for college quietly behind my mother's back using some savings he never told her about. After graduation, I worked for a local magazine, then bounced between freelance gigs, editing ghostwriting content for websites. It was never steady, never glamorous, but it kept me going. Then I got married. We moved to Boston. I thought I was building something real. But then the magazine I was working for folded. My freelance work dried up. My husband started acting distant, distracted. One night he told me he was done being patient, and 2 months later I was divorced and packing up my things. The only place I could go was home. My mother didn't hide her disappointment when I called her. "You're 42 years old, Emily," she said flatly. "You need to stand on your own 2 feet." "I just need a few months," I told her. "I'm not asking for a handout, just a roof and a little time." She hesitated, then agreed reluctantly. When I moved back in, everything was tense from the start. The house was exactly the same as I remembered. Same wallpaper, same creaky floorboards, but nothing about it felt warm. My mother made it clear that I was an intruder, a burden. I did what I could to help out. Cooked meals, cleaned, kept to myself. I spent most days at the town library or at the small coffee shop down the road writing and applying for jobs. But it didn't matter what I did. My mother watched me with a kind of distant judgment, like I was a guest overstaying my welcome. She constantly dropped passive-aggressive hints. "You should be applying to real jobs. People your age have mortgages. Maybe it's time to stop pretending you're a novelist." And then there was the fight. It was over something small, dinner maybe. I'd forgotten to take the chicken out of the freezer. She snapped, called me lazy. I finally said what I'd been holding in for months, that I wasn't lazy, I was exhausted, that she had never supported me, that the way she talked to me made me feel like a stranger in my own home. "You think this is your home?" she said, her eyes narrowing. "This hasn't been your home in a long time." I went to bed early that night, heart-racing, tears in my eyes. The next morning she was gone when I woke up. I went about my day, spent most of it at the library. When I returned that night, my key didn't work. And that's when the text came in. "You're not part of this family anymore. Don't come back." She didn't even say "I'm sorry," just a sentence that felt like a door slamming shut forever. Now, sitting in a lawyer's office 2 days later, I had no idea what to expect. I was tired, confused, and more alone than I had felt in years. When I walked into Carl Jennings' office, I half expected him to tell me there had been a mistake, that maybe she had the legal right to kick me out. Instead, he looked at me calmly and slid a manila folder across the desk. "Your father left behind a living trust," he said, "one that names you as a beneficiary and makes some specific provisions regarding the family property in Woodbury." I blinked. "A trust," Carl nodded. "One your mother never told you about." "A trust," I repeated, stunned. I I don't understand. My dad never mentioned anything like that." Carl folded his hands together and leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but direct. "Your father created a living trust 5 years before his death. It includes a number of stipulations regarding the property in Woodbury, the house your mother currently occupies. One of the central conditions is that you, Emily Walker, are entitled to use the home as a primary residence at any time for as long as you need." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "You're saying my mother didn't have the right to lock me out? She violated the terms of the trust the moment she changed the locks." Carl confirmed. "Your father appointed her as a co-trustee, but the trust makes it very clear you have a right to reside in the house whenever you choose. No eviction, no restrictions." My mouth went dry. So why didn't anyone tell me? Carl exhaled slowly. That's the more complicated part. As a trustee, your mother was legally obligated to inform you of the trust and its terms upon your return to the property. There is documentation that she received a reminder from our office about your rights sent shortly after you moved in again 6 months ago. She never responded. I felt my stomach drop. She knew yes, and I believe she intentionally withheld that information. I leaned back in the chair trying to absorb the weight of what he was saying. My mother had not only locked me out of the house, she'd done so knowing it was illegal. And she never told me about the trust or the rights my father had tried to give me. What else is in the trust? I asked. Carl opened the folder again, flipping through a few pages before pulling out a printed spreadsheet. There is also a financial component, a fund of $95,000 designated for your use specifically to support your writing career. I froze. My father, he set that aside for me, yes. In fact, the fund is titled For Emily's Light. He glanced up at me, eyes softening slightly. Your father wanted to make sure you had a chance to pursue your work even if no one else supported you. My throat tightened, and I had to blink fast to keep the tears from spilling over. But I've never seen that money. Carl's expression turned grim. We conducted a preliminary audit of the trust account after the lockout incident. There have been withdrawals, substantial ones, roughly $60,000 over the past 3 years. Withdrawn by who? Your mother. She had joint access as trustee. I stared at him, disbelief turning into something hotter, anger, betrayal, something primal. She used it for herself. Based on the records, yes. Some of the expenditures include home renovations, a new furnace system, a partial kitchen remodel, and a used SUV purchased last year. None of those fall within the permitted scope of the trust. These are clear violations. I sat in silence, trying to steady my breathing. $60,000. That could have changed everything. I had spent the last decade stringing together freelance jobs, working late into the night, burning out just to keep my writing alive. All that time, my mother had access to a fund that was meant to support me. And she took it. What happens now? I finally asked, my voice low. We have several options, Carl said. The most immediate is to notify your mother of her breach of fiduciary duty and formally demand that she restore your access to the property and the remainder of the trust fund. And if she refuses, Carl looked me straight in the eye, then we file suit, and she will likely be removed as trustee. In addition, she could be required to pay restitution out of her personal assets. The words felt surreal. Legal action against my own mother. I couldn't wrap my head around it. She'll deny it, I said quietly. She'll say it was all for the house, for the family. She always makes herself sound like the victim. Carl nodded. That's why we need to stay grounded in facts. We have documentation, bank records, dated invoices, and a clear paper trail. She can't dispute it in any serious way. There was a long silence between us. I don't want to destroy her, I said eventually. I just want my life back. I want my home. And I want what's mine. Carl gave a small nod. Then we'll begin with a formal letter of notice and request a meeting. As I walked out of the law office and into the crisp Vermont air, the weight of it all hit me. My mother had shut me out literally and figuratively, but my father had quietly built a safety net beneath me years ago. He must have known, must have seen this coming. He couldn't stop it while he was alive, but he left something behind, a way for me to stand again. That night in the motel, I pulled out the file Carl had given me and read every page. And at the bottom, taped to the last sheet, was a yellowing envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter from my father, written in his careful looping handwriting. If you're reading this, M, it means you're facing something I feared might happen. I'm sorry, but you've always been stronger than they knew. Don't let this break you. This trust is not about money. It's about freedom. Your words are needed in this world, and so are you. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and cried for the first time in weeks. I woke the next morning feeling like I'd barely slept at all. My body ached from the motel mattress, but it was nothing compared to the heaviness in my chest. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter from my father, the trust, the money that had been siphoned away. It was like discovering I had been walking through a dark tunnel my whole life, only to find out there had been a flashlight tucked in my coat pocket all along, and someone had stolen the batteries. Still, the letter gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not rage, not sadness, something quieter, steadier, resolve. I drove to the library and sat down at one of the public computers to check my email. I had written to a few small publishers the week before pitching a manuscript I'd been polishing for 2 years. Nothing yet, but I told myself it was still early. Then I checked my bank account. My stomach twisted. It was nearly empty. I'd forgotten how low I was running. I had paid for the motel with the last of my savings, and now all I had left was $53 and some change. I didn't even have enough for another full night at the motel. I scrolled back through the bank activity and saw a withdrawal $750 from the joint savings account I had opened with my mother back when I first moved home. We'd used it briefly to share expenses for groceries and utilities. The money had been mine. She was only listed as a secondary signer. Except now I saw she had changed her status at some point. Somehow she'd become the primary. I sat there staring at the screen, heat rising in my face. I called the bank. They confirmed it. The withdrawal was authorized by the primary account holder. My mother. There's nothing we can do, the bank rep said gently. She's legally entitled to withdraw the funds under the current account structure. That was it. The last safety net had been cut. I walked out of the library trying to keep my breathing steady. I texted Carl. Just saw my joint account is empty. Mom withdrew all of it. He replied almost instantly. We'll add it to the documentation. Hang tight. But it didn't help with the immediate problem. I had no money, no home, no family, and no idea what to do next. I considered calling an old friend in Boston, but we hadn't spoken since the divorce. I thought about sleeping in my car, but wasn't even sure how long I could keep the gas tank filled. Panic crept in sharp and overwhelming. Then I remembered the spare sleeping bag in my trunk. I'd used it during a camping trip 3 summers ago. I drove to a small rest stop just outside of town, parked in a back corner, and curled up in the back seat. That night I cried until I couldn't anymore. The next morning I returned to the law office looking worse for wear. My hair was a mess and my clothes were wrinkled from sleeping in the car. But Carl didn't bat an eye. We're moving forward, he told me. I've sent the formal notice. We've requested a response within 5 business days. What if she ignores it? Then we escalate. I nodded, even though part of me still couldn't believe any of this was real. I just don't understand why she's doing this, I said softly. Why now? What did I do that made her hate me this much? Carl didn't answer right away. Then he said, It's not always about what you did. Sometimes it's about what people never dealt with inside themselves. Later that day, I drove past the house. The driveway was empty. The curtains in my old bedroom were open, but the room looked dark. I sat across the street in my car and just stared. That house had once been a place of warmth, of Sunday pancakes, of stories by the fireplace. Now it felt like a monument to something I no longer belonged to. A neighbor walking her dog passed by and gave me a small wave. I forced a smile, then looked down at the passenger seat where the folder of legal documents lay. It wasn't just about getting back into the house anymore. It was about everything that had been taken from me over the years. My voice, my choices, my place in the family. That night I slept in the car again. The temperature dropped into the 40s, and I had to run the engine for heat every few hours. I wrapped the sleeping bag tighter and stared at the ceiling. And for the first time since the lockout, I didn't feel powerless. I felt angry, focused, determined. She could take the key. She could drain the bank account. She could pretend I didn't exist. But she couldn't erase the truth. The house was mine to live in. The fund was mine to support my writing. And my father, God bless him, had made sure I'd have the tools to fight back. 3 days after Carl sent the formal notice to my mother, I was sitting in the corner of the library, flipping through job listings when my phone buzzed. It was an email from Carl. Subject update on the trust. Attached was a document labeled Amendment, Walker Family Living Trust. I opened it, my heart thudding. The file was a scanned copy of a notarized document dated 6 months before my father's death. The amendment made two key changes. First, the house was explicitly listed as part of the trust, titled under a legal entity not under my mother's name. Second, in the event of a dispute or violation of trust, conditions trustee responsibilities would shift to a neutral third party. Carl had highlighted a section in yellow. In the event that co-trustee Linda Walker breaches her fiduciary duties or restricts beneficiary access without cause, trustee control will be passed to a named independent party as designated by Walter Walker. And below that, another name was typed in bold: Caroline Beck. I stared at it. Caroline had been my father's cousin, a soft-spoken, no-nonsense woman who lived in a neighboring town. We hadn't been close, but I remembered her well. She'd come to holidays, always sat beside my dad, and they would laugh quietly together about some shared family joke no one else understood. She was a retired accountant known in our town for being honest, fair, and incredibly organized. I texted Carl immediately. "Who's Caroline Beck?" He called me within a minute. "Caroline is your father's designated backup trustee," he said. "She was added to the trust when he became ill. He wanted someone impartial, someone outside the immediate family in case of—" Well, what's happening now? I leaned back in the library chair, overwhelmed. "So what does that mean?" "That she can take over." Carl's voice was calm and certain. "It means we have leverage. If your mother refuses to cooperate, we can petition the court to have Caroline officially instated as the acting trustee. Once that happens, your mother loses all control over the house, the fund, and the trust decisions. Permanently." I didn't speak right away. A part of me felt relief so deep I could barely breathe. Another part of me felt something harder to name: grief, maybe, or a strange quiet sadness. That it had come to this. That my own mother had to be legally removed from a role meant to protect me. Carl continued, "We've already reached out to Caroline. She responded immediately and is willing to step in. She even asked if she could speak with you directly. I agreed. And an hour later, Caroline called. Her voice was the same as I remembered, clear, practical, with a gentle lilt that reminded me of warm kitchens and Sunday afternoons. "Emily," she said, "I'm so sorry this is happening to you. I didn't even know Dad had updated the trust," I said. "He did it after his second hospital stay," she told me. "He never told Linda. He wanted to, but he was afraid she'd find a way to contest it. So he asked me to keep it confidential until necessary." She paused, then added, "He was worried about how she treated you, about how she dismissed your writing. He wanted to make sure you had something, your own ground to stand on." My eyes burned. I turned away from the rest of the library and wiped my face quickly. "He never said anything to me," I whispered. "He thought the trust would be enough," Caroline said gently. "But he underestimated how far your mother would go to stay in control." I swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "We give her a choice," Caroline replied. "Step down quietly, or face legal removal and possible restitution claims." Carl followed up that same day with a formal offer. Linda could either relinquish control voluntarily and allow Caroline to assume trustee duties, or we would file in probate court to have her forcibly removed and sue for damages. 48 hours later, Carl received a typed response from my mother's attorney. It was brief, cold, and unsigned. "Mrs. Walker denies any wrongdoing and considers this matter to be a family misunderstanding. She maintains that Emily voluntarily left the premises and that all financial transactions were appropriate and within her rights. It was a wall, a refusal, a deflection." But we didn't stop. Carl filed the initial petition for trustee reassignment. Caroline signed an affidavit stating she was prepared to take over and had no personal interest in the assets beyond her fiduciary responsibility. Meanwhile, I stayed at the motel, barely scraping by, checking email constantly, waiting for news. Then on a rainy Thursday morning, Carl called. "She's stalling," he said, "but we've got movement." He explained that the county clerk had approved the request for a preliminary hearing to determine whether the trust had been violated. If the judge ruled in our favor, my mother would be stripped of her trustee status, and all her decisions, including locking me out, would be legally reversed. I felt my pulse in my ears. "When is the hearing?" I asked. "Next Tuesday, 10 a.m." I thanked him and hung up, then stared out the motel window at the wet asphalt. A swirl of emotions moved through me: fear, hope, grief, fury. Then something more powerful settled in: readiness. I would walk into that courtroom not as a victim, not as a daughter begging to be let back in, but as someone finally claiming her place, her truth. Dad had seen this coming. He had prepared a path even when I didn't know I needed one. It was time to walk it. The courthouse in Montpelier was smaller than I expected. Brick exterior, no grandeur. Just a simple building with creaky floors and hard benches. Still, my hands shook as I walked up the front steps on Tuesday morning. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours the night before. My nerves felt like live wires. I wore my best clothes, what I could find clean in my suitcase, slacks that didn't quite fit anymore, and a navy blue sweater I'd borrowed from a friend months ago and never returned. My shoes were scuffed, but at least I looked presentable. I needed to. Carl met me at the entrance. His presence alone steadied me. He handed me a printed copy of our filing and said quietly, "You ready?" I nodded. "Let's do it." Inside, the hearing was held in a modest room with one long table in front of the judge's bench and a few rows of chairs behind it. My mother arrived 10 minutes late wearing a long wool coat and sunglasses, even though it was cloudy outside. She didn't look at me. She sat at the opposite end of the table beside her attorney, a stern-looking woman named Harriet Daniels. Caroline was already there. She gave me a kind nod as I took my seat beside Carl. The judge, a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, reviewed the case file in silence for several minutes before speaking. "This matter concerns the Walker Family Living Trust and a petition to reassign trustee responsibilities due to alleged breaches of fiduciary duty." Carl stood and presented our case clearly and calmly. He outlined the following. The trust had been created by Walter Walker, with Emily Walker named as a primary beneficiary. Linda Walker was appointed co-trustee with duties to inform the beneficiary and manage funds strictly for her benefit. The trust included provisions allowing Emily unrestricted access to the property. Funds totaling approximately $60,000 were withdrawn by Linda Walker for home improvements and unrelated personal expenses. The beneficiary, Emily, had been denied residence by being locked out without legal process. He submitted the bank statements, invoices, and correspondence from our firm, all carefully documented. Harriet Daniels pushed back as expected. She argued that Emily had abandoned the home voluntarily and that Linda was simply maintaining the property for long-term family benefit. She tried to frame it as a personal family disagreement that had escalated beyond reason. Carl didn't flinch. "With respect, Your Honor, this is not about family drama. It's about legal obligations. Trustees are not permitted to make unilateral decisions that deny a beneficiary their lawful rights, nor are they allowed to use trust funds for self-benefit. The documentation is clear. This is not a misunderstanding. It's a violation." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Caroline. "Ms. Beck, are you willing to accept trustee responsibilities if reassigned?" "I am," she said firmly. "I was appointed by Mr. Walker specifically for this reason." Then the judge turned to me. "Ms. Walker, do you have anything to add?" I stood heart-pounding. "I didn't want this," I said. "I didn't want a courtroom or a legal fight. I wanted a home, a place to land after a difficult chapter of my life. But my mother didn't just deny me shelter. She used money meant to support me. She pretended I didn't exist. And I don't believe my father set up that trust for it to be ignored." Silence followed. My mother still didn't look at me. The judge glanced down at his notes. "I'll take this under consideration and issue a ruling by the end of the week." The hearing ended without ceremony. I walked out into the crisp air feeling drained but oddly lighter. I had said what I needed to say. I had stood up for myself. Caroline walked beside me. "You did well," she said. "I feel like I just survived an avalanche." She smiled softly. "Sometimes survival is victory." That night I stayed at Caroline's guest room. She offered without hesitation after seeing the circles under my eyes and the way I winced when I stood. Her home was tidy, quiet, filled with the smell of lemon tea and old books. In the morning she handed me a notebook. I found this in a box of Walter's things, she said. He gave it to me for safekeeping. He wanted you to have it when the time was right. I opened it carefully. It was my father's handwriting, page after page, letters, reflections, little memories, advice. It was like he had left pieces of himself behind stitched into the paper, as if he knew I'd need to hear his voice long after he was gone. I spent the entire day reading that notebook, and by the time I reached the last page, I felt something shift. I wasn't just fighting for property or money. I was reclaiming a legacy. Later that evening, Carl called. The judge ruled in our favor, he said. I nearly dropped the phone. Linda is officially removed as trustee. Caroline is now in control of the trust. You have full legal access to the house, and the remaining funds will be secured under her management. I didn't speak. I couldn't. You did it, Emily. I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. Not from sadness, from relief. From the sense that for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning again. 2 days after the court ruling, Caroline and I arrived at the Woodbury house together. Legally, it was now under her authority as trustee, and I had the right to return. But even with the law on my side, my heart thudded hard in my chest as we pulled into the driveway. Everything looked the same. The flower beds I used to help Dad weed, the porch swing with chipped white paint, the kitchen window where light used to spill out in the early mornings when he made coffee. Except now the blinds were drawn. Caroline parked and looked at me. Do you want me to go in first? No, I said quietly. I need to do this. I walked up the steps slowly, my hand resting on the railing for balance. The front door was locked, but Caroline used the trustee's key to open it. I stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish. Mama. I called, my voice low. I heard footsteps. Then she appeared from the hallway, looking exactly the same neat blouse, her graying hair pinned up a tight line at her mouth. You shouldn't be here, she said. That's not up to you anymore, I replied. Her eyes narrowed, flicking past me to Caroline. This is still my home. No, Caroline said gently but firmly. It's part of the trust. And the court has ruled. Emily has the legal right to return. My mother crossed her arms. So that's how it is. You all decided I'm the villain now. No one decided anything I said. You made choices. You locked me out. You drained the fund. You knew what you were doing. I was trying to protect the house. She snapped. Your father didn't know how hard it is to keep a property like this running. My jaw clenched. You were supposed to protect me too. That's what a trustee does. She looked away, jaw tight. For the first time, her eyes flickered somewhere between guilt and fury. You've always been dramatic, she muttered. No, I said, my voice low but unwavering. I've always been honest. I've always been me. And you've never accepted that. Because you were never realistic, she shot back. You wasted your time writing stories. You could have had a career, a family. I did, I said. I had a life. Maybe not one you approved of, but it was mine. And when it fell apart, I came here hoping for support. Instead, you pushed me out like I was some stranger on your doorstep. The silence that followed was sharp and suffocating. Caroline stepped forward. Linda, the court order is final. You're no longer in charge of the trust. If you wish to stay in the house, we can discuss a cohabitation agreement. But you no longer have control. Emily is entitled to live here, and you cannot deny her access again. My mother didn't move. Her face was pale, the lines around her mouth deeper than I remembered. Finally, she said, So that's it. You take everything now. You win. This was never about winning, I said. It was about not disappearing, about not letting you erase me. Her eyes glistened for a moment, but she blinked the tears away. I could almost see it, the weight of everything she hadn't dealt with. The disappointment she felt about her own life somehow transferred onto mine. The need for control when the world spun beyond her reach. You should have been more like your father, she said softly, more to herself than to me. I took a slow breath. I am. I didn't say it with pride or arrogance. I said it with sadness, because I had spent so much of my life trying to earn her respect, only to find that it was never mine to earn. Caroline gave her time to gather herself, then calmly explained that the trust fund would now be monitored closely, that the remaining balance, just under $35,000, would be protected and dispersed monthly to support my writing career, that any further misuse would lead to civil charges. My mother said nothing. When she finally turned and walked back toward the hallway, she paused at the edge of the stairs. "You always thought I was the enemy," she said. "No," I answered quietly. "I thought you were supposed to love me." She didn't reply, just climbed the stairs and disappeared. Caroline and I stood in the stillness of the hallway for a moment. Then she handed me a set of keys. "These are yours," she said. I walked into the kitchen, the same table where my dad used to read the newspaper. The old ceramic cookie jar shaped like a chicken. The curtains I once helped hang on a sunny spring afternoon. It was all still here, but now I was here on my own terms. I went upstairs and stepped into my old bedroom. The posters were gone, the bookshelves empty, but I could see it who I used to be, who I was still becoming. I opened a box Caroline had helped me retrieve from storage inside, were my notebooks, my manuscripts, my half-finished drafts. I sat at the small desk by the window, opened my laptop and started typing. Not to escape, but to tell the story. My story. 2 weeks passed. The air in Vermont had turned colder, crisper. The leaves that once burned red and orange were now crunching underfoot in faded brown piles. I stayed in my house, mostly in the mornings and late at night, writing at the small desk by the window. Caroline visited often, helping organize the financial records, overseeing repairs that had been abandoned mid-renovation. She was calm, methodical, and never once pushed me. She just showed up, asked what I needed, and listened. My mother stayed in the house as well for now. We hardly spoke, and when we did, it was only about necessary logistics, groceries, schedules, the mail. There was no apology, no big tearful moment of reconciliation, just space and silence. And maybe that was enough for now. Carl helped transfer the remaining trust funds into a managed disbursement account. Each month, I would receive a stipend enough to support my writing and rebuild slowly. I had no illusions of comfort, but it felt like I could breathe again. I bought a secondhand desk, a better chair, and unpacked my father's old typewriter. I didn't use it, but I kept it beside me like a totem, a reminder of where I came from. Then one quiet afternoon, a small email arrived. A boutique literary publisher from upstate New York had read the sample I sent them a month ago. They wanted my manuscript, not just to read it, to publish it. I stared at the message, my hands over my mouth. The story I had started 2 years earlier, in the corner of a crowded cafe, had made its way into someone else's hands, and they saw something in it worth sharing. The email ended simply, "We'd love to work with you on bringing this story to life." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Not because I was welcomed in, but because I had walked through fire, stood in the ashes, and built a place for myself anyway. I stood up, walked down the stairs, and opened the back door. The wind rustled the trees. The sun fell gently across the porch where my father used to sit. I stepped outside barefoot on the cold wooden boards and whispered a thank you to the man who had seen me when no one else did, who had protected me quietly even after he was gone. And as the wind lifted the last few leaves from the maple trees in the yard, I knew this was not just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something entirely mine. Some people imagine family as a warm, permanent thing, like a lighthouse that's always shining no matter how rough the sea gets. For a long time, I believed that too. But over these past months, I've come to understand that family isn't always the place you're born into. It's the place where you're allowed to be fully yourself, without apology, without fear. I used to think something was wrong with me because I didn't fit my mother's vision, because I couldn't be neat, predictable, and practical the way she needed. But the truth is, she couldn't love what she didn't understand, and I couldn't keep shrinking just to be accepted. When she locked me out, it felt like the final proof that I wasn't worthy, that I'd failed not just as a daughter, but as a person. But now I see it differently. She didn't push me out because I was broken. She pushed me out because I was no longer willing to be who she needed me to be. And that's not failure, that's freedom. My father understood that in a way she never could. He didn't shower me with praise or grand speeches. He gave me something much harder to find quiet belief. The trust he created wasn't just a legal document, it was his last act of love. A message written in law: you belong, you matter, your voice is worth protecting. I've read his notebook so many times now I've memorized parts of it. One line in particular echoes through me again and again. They'll tell you to play it safe, but the ones who leave a mark are never the ones who stayed quiet. I think about that when I sit down to write. I think about it when the fear comes back whispering, I'm not good enough, not strong enough, not anything enough. I'm learning to answer that voice with truth. I'm still healing, still letting go of years spent chasing validation that never came. Some days I miss the fantasy of a mother who could have been different. Some days I wish we could rewind, start again, undo the damage. But most days I'm just grateful to finally be here on solid ground that's mine. The trust helped me reclaim my space. But the real gift, it reminded me who I am. A writer, a daughter, a survivor, someone who stood at the locked door and didn't walk away, someone who chose to stay and speak even when it would have been easier to disappear. If you're reading this and you've ever felt like the black sheep, the outsider, the one who just didn't fit, I want to say this clearly. You are not broken, you are not too much, and you are not alone. There's strength in stepping away from a mold that was never meant to fit you. There's power in saying, this is who I am, even if no one claps for it. And sometimes when the world slams the door in your face, someone you love has already left a key hidden in the folds of your story, just waiting for you to find it. 6 months after I moved back into the house, spring arrived in Woodbury. The snow melted slowly from the roof. Small green buds pushed through the frozen soil along the edge of the yard. The same yard where I used to sit with my father on summer evenings, our legs dangling off the back steps as fireflies lit up the grass. Life didn't feel perfect, but it felt real. I had my space, my routine, and finally, my purpose. Most mornings I rose early, made coffee, and wrote for 2 or 3 hours, sometimes longer. The manuscript I had submitted was going through edits now. The publisher had matched me with an editor who believed in the story as much as I did. They said my voice felt steady and earned. I liked that. Caroline continued managing the trust with grace and clarity. She visited once a week for tea and paperwork, but mostly she came to check on me not just as a trustee, but as someone who had quietly stepped into the shape of family when mine had collapsed. My mother still lived in the house, but we rarely spoke. It wasn't anger anymore, just space. We had reached a silent agreement coexistence without conflict. She stayed upstairs. I kept to my part of the house. We crossed paths, exchanged short phrases about groceries or weather, then returned to our corners. There was no apology, no reckoning. And maybe that was okay. Some wounds never close all the way. Some relationships don't heal into what we hope. They just soften, quiet, fade into something manageable. I used to want her to understand me, to see me the way Dad did. But now I know that some people just don't have the tools, and their failure to love us doesn't mean we are unlovable. It only means they couldn't meet us where we stood. A few weeks ago, I received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a scarf, one I remembered from childhood. My mother used to wear it in winter, a deep blue with tiny white stars embroidered along the edge. Tucked inside was a note handwritten in small, neat cursive. You always said it looked like a sky full of stories. Maybe now you'll write your own. No name, no signature. But I knew. And it was enough. Not for a full repair, but for a thread. One tiny stitch in a fabric that had been torn for years. I wrapped the scarf around my neck the next morning, opened the window above my desk, and let the breeze roll in as I began writing again. This time not just for survival, not even for publication, but because the words were mine, and because somewhere long ago, my father had planted the seed of belief that had finally bloomed. He once told me, the strongest roots grow underground, quiet, unseen, but unshakable. I know now he wasn't just talking about trees, he was talking about me.